When we think about successful modern living, we tend to conjure up in our minds an image of having a very good job, making a lot of money, having a lot of things, having a lot of friends, maybe even having access to great technology so that we can have very convenient living and also more entertainment. And so it's so interesting that one of the most influential writers who's actually done a very interesting life experiment on the right way to live in the modern world was actually a person who abandoned modern life altogether. And he actually went into the woods and built a cabin and lived there for a few years. And he wrote a book. So today I want to tell you the story of Henry Thoreau, this 19th century writer and philosopher who did exactly that. And he wrote this book called Walden. And it's so interesting because the insights that he gathered is actually quite contrary to most of our aspirations. So Henry Thoreau was born in Concord in the United States, in Massachusetts, and he was born to a very interesting family. His father was a pencil maker. Throughout his entire life, he went through the very conventional path, and he even studied at Harvard University for a few years. When he was done with university, he decided to pursue the usual path. He had a job, but he was largely dissatisfied with it, and he even joined the family business of making pencils. But he was also largely dissatisfied. He was just dissatisfied with the general convention. He thought there must be more to life than just doing all these things that we're told to do, all these things that we are told we should aspire to. It was his chance encounter with Ralph Waldo Emerson, who famously spearheaded transcendental philosophy, the idea that reality consists of both the material aspect of reality, but also the spiritual aspect of reality. And the spiritual aspect being more important, its discovery leading to a deeper, more fulfilling life. And that really influenced Henry Thoreau. His relationship with Emerson would also drive it further, as Emerson encouraged Thoreau to explore his thoughts and really his own direction in life, encouraged him to become a writer. Thoreau tried, but he found his home to be very busy and his life to really be quite noisy and full of disturbances. He needed somewhere quiet, and just so happens Emerson actually had a piece of land in the forest. And so he encouraged Thoreau to go into his forest and build a cabin and live there. And so Thoreau did just that. He went into the forest, he built his really famous cabin, a very small cabin that's apparently only a few square meters, and he lived there for 2 years of his life with the objective of doing two things: to write his book, but also to explore his philosophy. He wanted to know whether you could actually live a life where you don't really have to work, and he wanted to try and just maybe work 1 day a week and spend the rest of the other 6 days just exploring his own contemplations and thoughts and developing his philosophy. And it was really interesting because after actually having done that, he wrote his book Walden, which documented really his experience and his insights. And these insights are absolutely fascinating because they challenge the usual notions that we have in terms of modern living that were directly experienced and observed by Thoreau. To begin with, we have this idea that we need to get a job, make a lot of money and get things and be very happy. Now what Thoreau found out after having gone into the woods to live is that because he quickly learned how to live off the land, apparently he had his own sustainable farm that he started, and also he did also fish. So he was able to survive by himself. But he quickly realized one thing, and that was that being able to actually be independent and not to really work, he was actually incredibly happy. He was able to spend a lot of time doing things that he wanted. The other epiphany related to this was that he realized, and he wrote about it, that perhaps life isn't so much about how many things you can get, but rather how little things you can get by with, because he realized even though he had a very sort of minimalist living, not much things around him, he was still able to get by fine. And in fact, he was still able to have a very good life, despite the fact that he didn't really have a lot of material things with him. For Thoreau, money and work are really superfluous things because they don't really help you develop the soul. They don't really allow you to spend time with yourself, which leads to a second great epiphany from the book. The idea that oftentimes we think we need to surround ourselves with a lot of people to be very happy. Thoreau essentially lived by himself for those 2 years in the middle of the woods, totally isolated. Occasionally he had visits from friends, but he was absolutely alone most of the time. And to his own surprise, as he documented in his book, oftentimes we think that we need people around us in order for us to be happy, but oftentimes that is really an escape for us to avoid and ignore the gaps in our inner life that we need to face through introspection. And by being in the woods by himself, he had a lot of time. to introspect, to spend time by himself and really become more self-reliant and also really explore himself. And through doing that, he actually became a much more happier person, which of course challenges the idea that we need to have a lot of friends around us all the time. And finally, the other point that's also very interesting is the idea of technology. Thoreau wrote that technology is very much a distraction, and you realize that soon enough when you abandon it, because it distracts you from actual living. And in fact, rather than technology, rather than numbing yourself from actually living, when you don't have technology, become more mindful and more attentive of really your life and directly what's happening in your life, the emotions of living. And when you couple that with nature, a very big aspect of his insights, when you dwell yourself and you immerse yourself in nature, you'll be able to discover spiritual significance. To Thoreau, there's something inherently beautiful about nature, about the animals, about the streams, about the trees, and very much reflecting the beliefs of his mentor Emerson. It was his conviction that nature offers us a means to transcend ourselves and really achieve greater meaning in our lives. And so with all these lessons I've just highlighted, Thoreau presents us a totally different path to actually live. It is not to say that we should all just abandon our homes and just go into the woods, but rather that these are some of the things to keep in mind, that he presents a very alternative thought that challenges many of the preconceptions that we think would bring us success and happiness in modern life. Instead of just chasing money and great jobs and more things, we should realize that fulfillment might come in other forms. At a certain level, we can actually get by with less, and that there's more fulfillment and satisfaction and significance in developing ourselves. And rather than really focusing on just having a lot of social encounters and interactions, which is great, of course, however, it isn't the solution to discovering more about yourself and really addressing some of the gaps in your inner person. And rather than let ourselves be blinded by technology and modern entertainment, perhaps we should also take some time to indulge in a bit of contemplation and maybe consider once in a while to perhaps go into nature and draw greater inspirations for life.